A camo workout shirt.
A great move on their part to tell people when it's recording. You know, at first there was no warning. So like the creepiest person in the world could like, you know, hack Halle Berry's account, do a Zoom or something, and then not even tell her it was recording.
Well, I'm just happy to know that if I start jerking off on camera, that it's being recorded.
Well, Jeffrey Toobin, baby.
Jeffrey Toobin, he's my hero.
So if we were to ever do this again, would it be called? Because as a single guy, when I'm on my drinking nights, which is only 4 days a week these days, sadly, on my drinking nights, I'm out. You know, I do very little like drinking at home. Like as a married guy, probably most of your drinking is done at home.
Yeah, the vast majority.
And you know, now I do a lot of weed smoking when I'm home on my non-drinking days. Tuesday being a non-drinking day. So we could call the podcast Bourbon and Blunts. As
you know, it is more difficult than you thought. So my buddies came up with one, and I think you probably know at least one of those. So Richie Carnahan and Jeff Vexler have a podcast, and was started. The original name was The Gentile and the Jew. Actually, the original name was The Jew and the Gentile. And apparently there were at least like 4 or 5 podcasts named The Jew and the Gentile. And so they had to rename it to Vex, the Vex and the Bulldog.
Oh, so you're saying first we need to search if there's already 25
yeah.
called Bourbon.
Yeah, when you come up with a great name, you don't just run with it. You then search the podosphere. And apparently I was talking with the guy. So there's a guy that Jeff works with that was like, that kind of edits stuff. That's just what he does. And he says, I think there's potential here. And he's like, you know, you only need 500 subscribers to be in the top 90% of, of all sports podcasts. There's just so many out there that gain no traction, and they kind of felt like his was funny. I should send you the link because I've been a guest on the podcast. It is incredibly funny. It's a great podcast.
I mean, Vex and Richie are both fucking 09 legends.
They're incredible.
And Richie's one of the funniest humans of all time.
Richie's hilarious, and it took him, like I think it's going to take us a little while to get into the groove. It took Richie a while, I think mainly because, Vex has a legit recording studio where you've got the headphones and you can hear your own voice. And if you haven't voice before,
fuck him.
You have, well, there you go. If you haven't heard your own voice before, it is very disorienting when you do it the first time. And so it's taken Richie a little while to kind of come out of his shell. And the other problem is, Jeff is he was a sportscaster for NPR.
Right.
So he is
way ahead of Richie in terms of that so far.
He's incredibly knowledgeable. Richie has no knowledge whatsoever and is fully aware of that fact. And Richie, when he's self-conscious, is not good. You need Richie to kind of stretch out and start to feel his oats and just be willing to say whatever comes to his head.
Well, your point about like hearing your own voice for the first time is as a lunatic, I talk to myself constantly. So this was nothing new for me. And Richie being a fellow nut job, I'm very surprised he doesn't talk to himself constantly. I'm surprised to discover that was an issue for him.
But he doesn't, even if you talk to yourself, you don't hear the sound of your own voice. Like that's a whole separate situation.
I guess when I guess probably doing radio interviews as a college basketball coach would have been the first time I heard my own voice. But I don't know. Maybe I'm a weirdo, but I didn't feel like self-conscious giving the interview and didn't feel weird hearing my voice afterward. But we'll think of a name at some point. But the first thing I'm going to talk about, because we started on Facebook.
Yeah.
The raid of Mar-a-Lago. one, is raid even the right term? Like they executed a search warrant. I mean, were guns drawn? Like, were they kicking doors down? Like, do you know the details on that? Like, is raid even an accurate word for starters?
Well, like I said, when Trump first reported this, and he didn't really like report it, he kind of tweeted it on his own platform that nobody is subscribed to except for journalists who are interested in covering Trump. And so, and they kind of read the tweet that's not a tweet because it's on whatever his platform is. Frankly, I saw it reported in the news and I didn't believe it. It's coming from Trump. Like, Trump has a tendency to over exaggerate any and everything. So I'm like, I'm going to wait until I see more about this in other platforms. And slowly kind of the news came down that yes, in fact, the FBI had executed a search warrant. And in that warrant, you have to have a crime, probable cause. So the crime was, again, this violation of the Presidential Records Act. And that was purportedly the reason that FBI agents were coming into his Mar-a-Lago abode to, find these documents, I guess.
Well, but my question is like, when raid, to me, that's flash grenades, doors flying open, machine guns lifted, right? Like,
yeah, you're thinking of these no-knock.
But what I'm
raids
saying
that
is
have been very
is a search warrant being professionally executed with holsters, with pistols holstered. Like,
well, I mean,
because the reason why I'm asking this is I wouldn't have thought about it on my own. Because certainly if I'm the one whose home the FBI has entered, it would probably feel like a raid to me, no matter what the circumstances were. But I read an article that the FBI is sort of pushing back, like, this was not, trust me, we're experts on raids. And that's not what this was, just for the sake of linguistic accuracy. Like, is the simple, peaceful, pistols holstered execution of a search warrant, should raid even be the term that we're using?
well,
If that's what happened, by the way, I haven't seen footage. For all I know,
the FBI did this intelligently. Trump was not even at Mar-a-Lago at the time. So he was relying on reports from folks that were, I guess his house staff or whoever. I don't know. I'm not wealthy enough to have people that are at my house when I'm not there. But whoever
yes.
Trump's
Yes.
people were that was calling it. I don't know if it was Consuelo, the housekeeper. I don't know who was calling Trump, but apparently somebody told Trump, yes, there are people here. They're searching through all your stuff. Which, okay, like raid, good enough. Like I don't know what constitutes as a raid or whatnot, but they were executing a search warrant. And so the clear question is, David can come in here and debate me all I want. This is kind of when there was a very similar situation going on with our ex-secretary of state. And she had a server that apparently had all of her communications while she was Secretary of State on it. The FBI didn't just come in and take possession of the server. Like, they sent her a nice letter, she responded, or had her attorneys respond and say no, blah, blah, blah. And so there was like a long back and forth that took months and months. Now, the question is, was that the situation that took place? Like, he acted like there was no warning. It sounds to me, based on reports, that there actually was a back and forth there. And I don't know if,
there must have been, right? I mean,
yeah.
We've been hearing about these 15 boxes for a long time. Okay, so
Yeah.
one, and this is a question I'd love to hear. My friends are even more liberal than I am. Hear their opinion on, like, what about why would Trump have not destroyed the 15 boxes if they were damaging? He certainly, it seems, destroyed plenty of other documents. Whether they were damaged or not, who knows? But like, if this almost seems to me like best educated guess uh, Trump was being petulant, and they were like, give them back. And he was like, no.
It
And
was like,
finally,
yeah,
like, well,
yeah,
we have
yeah,
to go
yeah.
get them. And I really think, like, we talked about this earlier, but I really think that this is just one more example of Trump being a PR puppeteer master, because I think the reason he was being petulant is that he knew at some point in time they would come and get them. At some point, you have to. And then once they come to get them, he gets to go with the they raided my home. The FBI's persecuted me politically. And now here we are talking about him, which with the classic
Which
malignant
is,
narcissist precisely
yes,
desires.
that's the only thing Trump wants to talk about is Trump.
Right. I mean,
Everybody's talking about me
do you
again.
think that,
Yeah.
I mean, we're speculating here, and you are, and I credit you for this because greatly, because I find it triggering when white men always want to wait for all the facts, always, because half the time that involves a dead black kid with a police officer who did the killing, right? And it's like,
I kind of think that's bullshit. I always like to wait for the facts
well, no, I
because
just said,
the facts outstanding.
no, I just said, I'm giving you credit here. I'm saying oftentimes when a white male wants to wait for all the facts, they're full of shit. They don't want to wait for anything. They just don't want to talk about it and deal with the obvious issue at hand, which is the fact that, you know, the 24 out of 25 off-duty New York City police officers who were black reported to Reuters that they were harassed off duty. Right? It's like the culture of the culture that permits the unconstitutional harassment of black people with total impunity is that's what's underneath the tip of the iceberg, right? It's the culture that permits it. Well, anyway, usually, oftentimes, the context of a white person saying we got to wait for all the facts to come out is that they just don't want to talk about, you know, the underlying issues we have in society racially. But you were always a wait for all the facts to come out guy, and I know that about you. I appreciate the intellectual consistency, as I mentioned to you before. But what do you think?
My issue is that if you go and just create this long line of logic based on like 2 or 3 data points, you're going to end up sounding like a jackass in the long run.
Down the road, it's entirely possible.
Which is, you know, I mean, that's the punditry. That's the trap of punditry, right? Like that's what pundits are, I guess, technically supposed to do. I just don't like that approach because you've got to say, hold on, like caveats. This is what I think is going on here. So
well, I think that's fair, but I'm curious to get your reaction to my speculation there, though. Even though you prefer not to speculate, do you think it's possible that this entire thing was a setup for Trump to do what he does best, which is marketing and self-promotion and public relations? The guy, and you know I hate him, but he's a fucking genius on those topics.
I think that would be brilliant. I 100% think that that he is clever enough. I credit Merrick Garland with not being such a doofus as to, you know, we're in the space where we're 90 days before a federal election, right? That he's not going to send FBI goons over to Trump's house without ample justification, and hopefully it's well beyond. You have some documents that we need to keep for posterity. You know, I mean, everybody's like, he broke the law. He broke the law. We need to have these documents and we need to have them in the National Archives. Like, this is a travesty if we don't have these. It's like, no, hold on.
Well,
like,
I mean, yeah, but
we can wait 90 days, right?
But at the same point in time, like I don't think these documents are. I mean, if they were critical, he would have destroyed them, I believe. Right? And so, like, if the FBI went and got these 15 boxes back, then it just be it has to be like Trump kept daring them to do this. You know, I'm not giving you the fucking boxes back. Go fuck yourself. What do you think about that? As he said, every Department of Justice thing the entire time since he's been, you know, a subject of their ire.
So my thought is it's probably January 6th related. They're probably hoping to gain something in addition to what is in those boxes, and I think the warrant kind of opens the door for them to get inside, and I think they go from there to get other data that they want. And I would think if they're to the point where they're sort of executing this warrant on a past president of the United States, that they would have something that they're going for other than other than we've got some documents that we really need to keep in the presidential record from previous presidencies.
Yeah, but I don't think that that was it. I think it was like, and again, the speculation, but like, what do you do if a former president is acting like a petulant child and won't follow the law, right? You clearly, they clearly, we think, broke the law by not leaving those documents behind like he's supposed to. I'm not saying that this law, I'm not saying the specific documents are super important or that the specific law is the equivalent of, you know, a double homicide. I'm not saying any of that. What do you do though? If you're the if you're the DOJ and you've asked for the documents back, you have the laws behind you, and he just won't give them back. Do you just go, okay, fine, keep them, fuck it? Like what
Yeah.
like what are you supposed to do if you're the DOJ?
I mean, we have this this precedent, which was like Hillary Clinton, which she would not turn over her server.
Okay,
And
right,
she-
right, but she did. Right,
She
the
did
lawyers went
finally.
back and forth.
She did finally.
Well, we
And
can assume that there was a back.
I don't know
and forth
how many
between-
months it was.
Right, but we can
And this
assume there
could
was a
be like
back
an
and forth.
equivalent. This could be like an equivalent number of months. And when she turned it over, by the way, it was after they decided to wipe the server. They wiped the server and then handed it over to the. So that would be the equivalent of Trump burning the boxes and then handing over the ashes to the DOJ. That didn't happen. Apparently, these boxes still exist, and they're just kind of sitting there. And I imagine it's probably standard. And if you read the statute, and like I'm not, this is not mine. This is coming from the show that you hate. That if you read the statute closely, there, in addition to just taking the documents outside of the White House, you also have to have malicious intent. And proving this malicious intent is difficult. And if the boxes are sitting intact and you're looking for 100 pages out of 10,000s of pages of boxes, and those haven't been destroyed or otherwise taken back, then malicious intent becomes very difficult to prove. And that was ultimately what saved, Hillary Clinton's ass, was that they ultimately determined that it was not through malicious intent that she kept this second server. I would disagree. I think the entire intent of her having that server was to, avoid FOIA requests. And, that's very smart strategy until you get fought.
The reason why that, my limited understanding of that is the reason why I was not up in arms about that. And it's news to me that she wiped it before handing it back, by the way. I didn't know that. That seems
like with the cloth.
That seems absolutely outrageous.
You remember the with the cloth comments?
No, I don't. I missed that.
You have a very selective memory.
Well, when it works at all. But my understanding was that like basically every Secretary of State did something very similar, because you can't do the job if you have to always be communicating only when you're in this one super extra duper secure area. And then it's like, in order to do the job, you have to perform some of those duties when you're at your home or on an airplane or in a, at least that was the explanation that I didn't see contradicted. I didn't see people.
That was the explanation, but they're like, Colin Powell never used the U.S. Email system. Well, it's because they didn't have an email system when Colin Powell was Secretary of State. Like, that's how new email is. I'm sure you probably remember there was a time where, when we were younger, that you didn't just get an email address because you worked someplace.
So you're saying that explanation was bullshit. Verified.
That explanation was bullshit. Yes. And then so some other people used their private email some of the time. Hillary Clinton used her private email on her private server 100% of the time. She never used her Secretary of State email that she was issued. Not once.
Is that against the law?
It's against the law to not retain your records for FOIA request purposes. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you the same thing.
Unless you were granted, and it was like, well, you needed some sort of approval going up the chain, and so Hillary Clinton argued that she gave herself approval to do this.
Which is what Trump would say is I declassified those documents.
Exactly. And actually that's what one of his lackeys at that was working in the White House said, is that actually he said that he declassified all those documents. Did he? I don't know.
The timing
They didn't go through the paperwork that's required to say, hey, all of these documents are declassified. And if you declassify something, then you, I think, send it into the public sphere, I believe.
the timing of this seems to be so good for the GOP because it's coming off what was otherwise, in the minds of at least a lot of people, one hell of a week for the Democrats. My one caveat is, well, I guess two. One, I haven't read any of those bills. I've read a couple of articles summarizing them, but you never know who chose to write the summary. And I certainly have no faith or trust in Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer for that not to be just bloated as fuck with all sorts of pork and goodies that aren't necessary, and especially because it feels fundamentally dishonest that it's called the Inflation Reduction Act when it's really more of a climate bill and a way to make sure that that very wealthy people in particular aren't cheating on their taxes. So it's a very oddly and I feel dishonestly named bill. But there was it escaped me right now because I'm living up to my half of our podcast name, Blunts. But they passed something else pretty damn important this past week, did they not? They got two things done in the last week, 10 days.
Yeah, I mean, there's that bill. Was there another bill that I'm not aware of? That was the main one that I'm looking at.
I thought that's the one getting most of the coverage, but I thought they had another relatively important legislative victory recently, very recently. People were calling it the best week for Joe Biden since being elected. Prior to this raid dominating, I just called it a raid myself, right? Like prior to the search warrant being executed.
Well, I mean, what are you going to call it, right?
Well, yeah, well, that's one thing is that, I mean, a good buddy of mine got fired a long time ago from Division II head coaching job because footage emerged of him kicking a kid when he was down. And it was a kid who was, consistently not practicing hard enough, not in shape, not being tough. And he went down, was in the way of the drill. And so my friend went and basically scooped him up with his foot. Like, get up or get the fuck out, right? It's like
kicked him in the balls.
If you have groceries in your arm and you come home and you jiggle the door with the key and then you come back through and you close the door with your foot, like, is that kicking? I mean, there's not really a word for that. So like, how do you describe, there's no word to say someone fell down and rather than using your arms and maybe you were pissed off, you were like with your foot, you were like, get up, and kick is the only word in the English language. And it's like the executing of a search warrant doesn't even fit on the damn headline. There'd be no room for anything else. Yeah. There probably needs to be.
They have to say raid. Well,
what are your thoughts?
I think that's
what are your thoughts on the inaptly named and dishonestly named Inflation Reduction?
There are things in there that I like. I mean, I'm not going to lie.
Which is?
In order to, yes, it is wrongly named. Like, because you can't have a revenue neutral Inflationary Reduction Act. That's not the way inflation works. That's not going to be any sort of tool that's going to, I mean, I guess technically you could if you were taking sort of money out of the circulation, which this is not. It is increasing taxes on some while spending money. So spending money is inflationary, increasing taxes is deflationary. So you're kind of taking with one hand and giving with another. What I'm most excited about and what I've written about on Facebook with various liberal friends that I often don't communicate with because they're too freaking crazy, is the addition of nuclear. Which I credit Joe Manchin because, unfortunately, the Democratic Party is captured by the Greenies, who are anti-nuclear, against all logic. And so I think any step towards nuclear is a step in the right direction if you really care about getting off of fossil fuels. Because at the end of the day, I mean, what we learned in Texas, during the snowstorm, is that you need on-demand forms of energy, and that's either coming out of the ground via gas plants, or it's going to be nuclear. And I think nuclear is ultimately the future. And I think France is actually way out ahead of everybody else in Europe. And I kind of looked it up because I thought France was going away from nuclear, and no, they're not. They're still the most nuclear country in the world, and Germany, much to my chagrin, has moved away from nuclear, and now they're paying the price.
I would love to see, of course, we'll never ever have access to it, but I would love to see the total dollar amount that the fossil fuel industry paid to make sure that the single word Chernobyl was forever ingrained on the brains of the entire world. Because that accident really fucked up the great momentum that nuclear energy had. And of course, this is before electric cars, where nuclear energy would fix, would fix or certainly help, like even more than it would have initially, right? There weren't cars that could run on nuclear energy in 1985.
And it's a bad comparison. I mean, the Chernobyl nuclear plant was very poorly designed. It's a Soviet design. I've got a Soviet.
I didn't make the comparison. I'm saying that.
No. You're saying that they kept touting it again and again and again. So I got a joke for you. What do you call something that doesn't fit in your ass and doesn't buzz?
I don't know. Lots of things.
A Soviet-made ass buzzer. So yeah, that was a joke that I heard. I thought it was funny. You didn't think it was as funny as I did. Yeah, well, basically like Soviet things.
I mean, first of all, the setup of the joke was like, what doesn't fit in your ass and doesn't buzz? It's like a whale, a car, a house.
There's so many things.
I mean, I think it's like a riddle, I guess, more than a joke. But,
but yeah, so basically, yeah, Chernobyl.
So you're saying to rewind though. Sorry for my aside, but
okay, go ahead.
I'm curious because you've read more about this bill than I have, and than anyone else who would listen to this probably has. So it's going to be just our friends at first, and you read more about this type of stuff than just about anyone I know, and you try to be a good faith and honest broker. So this bill has a pretty substantial investment in nuclear energy. Is that true?
Supposedly. I mean, who really has? It's a giant bill, like everything that passes Congress these days. Like they're all designed like this to be so massive that there's going to be handouts to millionaires and billionaires and companies in that bill. Absolutely guaranteed. That's a given. But one of the things that Joe Manchin actually bargained for was to get nuclear added in there, which, hey, I mean, that kind of gets my motor going. It gets a lot of conservative motors going. It gets a lot of libertarian motors going as well, to add nuclear.
So we got 10 minutes left. So next time.
Yeah, I'm getting the same warning.
So speed round then. Palestine, Israel. I'm seeing a lot of journalists who you respect really blast the fuck out of Israel over what's just happened in the last couple of weeks, as disproportional as war crimes. And now you're not hearing that type of language on Fox or on MSNBC or CBS or ABC. But a lot of the independent journalists, I know you have a great deal of respect for, are livid with Israel. Do you know enough about it?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I don't know very much about it, but they killed an American journalist, and we're apparently not going to make a big deal
I
out
think
of
the number is
that.
15 dead Palestinian children confirmed by international journalism groups.
Mhm. Mhm.
15 dead children. You know, I come down with Jimmy Carter on this, um, who is seen as being a massive enemy of Israel today, but wasn't in his time. I still see him as an honest broker, and he refers to the state of Palestine as an apartheid state, and I don't see any evidence that he's wrong. It's the and I'm certainly also very sympathetic to Israel's situation. Like they're surrounded by people who wish they didn't exist, um, and it's not as if the Palestinians are honest brokers or operating in good faith. It's not as if they aren't, the doing whatever they can to kill Israelis any chance they get. So it's a very complicated situation. And when you see 15 dead kids, though, it's like fuck,
Palestine has the same issues that we have, that they keep, electing these shitty leaders that aren't solving their problems, and I think that's part of the problem. Dealing with Palestine. You would think Israel, like they've somewhat liberalized. They've gotten rid of what's his name,
Bibi.
Bibi, who was
That was like an hour
conservative.
ago after electing him and re-electing him and re-electing. It was
Yeah,
the longest serving Israeli prime minister in history.
yeah, he was there a long time. You would think he would get assassinated at some point. That's generally the way it goes.
Well, yeah, you know what though? He wasn't looking for peace. It's the ones who are looking for peace that there's
It's
a
the
lot.
hardliners that look for peace. Those guys are dead on sight.
Yeah, I mean there are people there who, and I think the good faith based people in Israel who absolutely believe that peace with the Arab Muslim world is a suicide pact for Israel. And based on the rhetoric and behavior of the Arab Muslim world, especially in that region, I guess I said Arab Muslim, so I don't even define that region, but based on their behavior, I don't find that view on the part of those people in Israel who feel that way. I don't find that view to be invalid. And so those folks don't want peace because they believe that's not possible. They reject the pretext of that. Like, like when you refuse to answer a question, I don't accept the pretext of that question. They don't accept the pretext of peace because they don't believe that the Arab Muslim world has any intention whatsoever of living up to it. And that making peace weakens Israel and guarantees that Israel will at some point no longer cease to exist. And I do not believe that view is an invalid view. It's a very complicated situation, obviously.
It's quite a pickle. And you talk about a two-state solution. I don't think we accept a two-state solution here in the United States in terms of the way that we live. There's more talk of that these days, but it's like, no, we've all got to learn to live together in one place, and yet we're going and telling the Israelis and the Palestinians, no, you all need to separate out amongst yourselves. And that's an emotional issue, like telling somebody to leave what is their home, even if they're settled in a hostile territory.
Yeah, well, you're seeing a lot of, you probably saw the same info I saw. According to exit polls, native Texans had we been the only ones allowed to vote, I'm not advocating, by the way, but had Native Texans been the only ones allowed to vote, Beto would have beat Ted Cruz. And so it is a lot of the people who, like, I'm getting the fuck out of this liberal hellhole, like moving to Texas specifically because of politics that have delayed, and I mean, we'll see, maybe prevented Texas from becoming the blue state it was projected to become.
That's interesting. And the Mexican immigrants who seem to hate Beto as well.
The Mexican immigrants hate
appropriating the Mexican name.
Yeah, well, shit. You've been to El Paso.
I've been to El Paso.
Yeah, I don't, and you know that I'm, quick to call out bigotry. I don't think that white folks in places like El Paso and San Antonio who have Spanish nicknames, I don't think that,
Carter, they're not guilty of appropriation.
If Carter Mayfield V is from New Jersey and you call him Cinco, maybe that's one thing. But in El Paso or San Antonio, cultures are super campechano.
I have a best friend who's called Trace, and one of my cousins is called Trace. Like, that is one of the most common names in San Antonio, is to be called Trace. And that is, by the way, you go to Mexico and that is the weirdest thing ever. It's like meeting somebody named Three in the United States. It's not something that happens.
Yeah, but it would be weird for me if I met even someone from Dallas in that situation. Like, that's such an San Antonio Corpus type of thing,
That's unusual. I don't know. There was a kid in my camp called Cinco, and I don't know where he was from, but it wasn't San Antonio.
So I'm going to upgrade. This is unacceptable, because one, it's more interesting to delve into stuff a lot deeper than this. But do Democrats keep the House in 2022?
No.
Do they keep the Senate?
Maybe. I think there's a strong possibility.
Who wins the Republican nomination in 2024?
I think it's 50-50.
Who wins the Republican nomination in 2024?
That's almost impossible to predict at this point.
I know.
I'm not even sure that Trump is running. If Trump doesn't run, right now it looks like DeSantis. But if Trump doesn't run, then I think a whole lot of other people jump into the race. I think DeSantis is in a free for all. If it's DeSantis versus Trump, then I think maybe Trump could probably take DeSantis.
If Trump is convicted of a crime that constitutionally would supposedly preclude him from running, would the Supreme Court allow him to run?
If the crime says no, then I don't think so. I think he would be disallowed from running. And I think most Republicans would be very happy to see that.
Is Joe Biden leading the Democrat ticket in 2024?
Most likely, yeah.
All right, I'm gonna hit stop because I want to make sure we get the video. But there we go. I think that's it. Hold on.